All right, everybody, welcome back into the Rowdy Studio. I'm Buzz Cutler, sitting here with Kenny Bruce from CDaily.com. And Kenny, you wrote an article sort of in anticipation of this evening's Hall of Fame induction ceremony of current guys who you think are pretty much lead pipe locks to get into the Hall. Is that a fair way of saying it?
Yeah, pretty much.
In terms of drivers, I think Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, who you cite, absolutely.
Yeah.
Tony Stewart might have just gotten over the hump this past season.
Well, I mean, I think he was as close to a lock as you could have been. But yeah, the third championship, I think that pretty much,
But then it gets a little bit more maybe controversial. Maybe that's not the right word. But you have Mark Martin and Kyle Busch as locks to make it into the Hall of Fame, neither of whom have won a Cup championship, as opposed to guys like Kurt Busch and Matt Kenseth who have. What is it especially about Kyle Busch that you think propels him ahead of a Kenseth or a Busch or another championship winner like Terry Labonte or Bobby Labonte?
I mean, putting Kyle in there, it's gonna be controversial.
Because he's Kyle Busch.
Because he's Kyle Busch. That's part of it. So we're gonna put him in there anyway. No, really, honestly, I think he's deserving of it. Just because if you look at what he's done in basically a decade at most that he's been competing across all three levels, and I know you're going to hear a lot of people say what he's done in the Nationwide Series, what he's done in the Truck Series, you can't lump that in, or you can't compare that to all those wins to the number of wins that somebody else would have just in Cup, but. I've been told, and I've heard it said a million times, it's not the NASCAR Sprint Cup Hall of Fame.
Right.
It's the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And I think what he has managed to do, he's won more than 100 races across the three series. I think with that, there's no question that he's going to be going in. Well,
see, and that brings up another guy because, as you said, it's not just the Cup Hall of Fame. So what about Ron Hornaday Jr.? 4 truck titles. Is he an automatic first ballot type guy?
Now, see, I think when you get down to people like Ron, and nothing against him because obviously he's been successful, he's going to get consideration. I mean, there's no doubt about it, and he may likely go in there one day. But the fact that he had all that success in a lower series, he did run in Cup, he has run in Nationwide, but he never had the success that he did there. That's going to be something that's, I'm looking at guys that are just locked in. I don't think there would be any doubt that if you were going to put somebody in tomorrow, who would you look at from the list and say, these guys need to go in now?
So Ron Hornaday, compared to a guy like Richie Evans, what Richie Evans accomplished in the lower series was so remarkable that his lack of experience in maybe Cup, lack
and
of
while,
success.
I agree that Richie Evans deserves to be in the Hall of Fame for what he did. I mean, a lot of people didn't know much about him at all. I didn't know a whole lot about him. I knew of him because, Martinsville was actually one of the first tracks that I went to, and I remember watching him race in the modified series there. But, he did have such success there. And, there are a lot of people on the voting committee that aren't new to the sport. They've been around and they understand and recognize the contributions of people not only from today but from yesterday and how that kind of stacks up with the overall the overall outlook of everybody.
Now, in terms of crew chiefs, you've got Jimmy Fennig in there, of course, who's won with a bunch of drivers and won a championship with Kurt Busch. Chad Canals, no-brainer. The only guy I could think of that maybe should deserve some mention but wasn't on your list was Zipadelli.
Yeah, we actually talked about some of these guys before that, and I had a handful of guys. I was like, okay, where do they fall? And Greg Zipadelli was the one crew chief that was in that group that were like, okay, he's won 2 championships, won a bunch of races, but he did them with one driver. And I say, well, Chad Canals won all his races with one driver, but they won so many, they were so successful. Not that that Greg hasn't been. I mean, he's been incredibly successful. I think part of the thing that would keep me from saying he's a lock right now is that once he and Tony split up, he didn't have that success with Joey Logano going forward. And some people can say, well, that's Joey, not having the experience and everything, but still his results ultimately are going to come back, to Greg at some point. So
right. Now, for owners, you have a list of 4, and it's hard to argue with any of these guys. Of course, Rick Hendrick, Richard Childress, Jack Roush, Joe Gibbs. What starts to become interesting with the owners group is they're still active. Do you think it's appropriate to enshrine any of these guys, like a Rick Hendrick, into the Hall of Fame while he is still very much active on a day-to-day basis in NASCAR?
Well, now, personally, from my perspective, and I am one of the 50 some odd people that do cast votes for this every year, I think if you're still active in the sport, then I have a hard time saying you need to go in. You know, we talked about Richard Childress. He won no races as a driver.
Right.
He's been incredibly successful as a team owner. So if you flip that around and he was incredibly successful as a driver, then gave that up and spent the last 20 years as an owner but only had, you know, moderate success, well, yeah, I could see putting him in as a driver. But I think that, you know, as long as he's a team owner, you know, you hear a lot of different conversations when you're in that room.
Right.
You know, people say, well, you know, these people deserve to go in. It would be nice if they could go in while they could still enjoy the honor and stuff like that. But to me, at some point, you have to draw the line and say, yeah, that would be nice, but are you turning your back on somebody else that's more deserving just to get this person in?
All right, he's Kenny Bruce, writer for SceneDaily.com and a voter for Hall of Fame enshrinement. I'm Buzz Cutler. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week to talk about everything that happened at the induction ceremony at the NASCAR Hall of Fame.
Rowdy.com. Say it like it is.
Say what like it is?
Rowdy.com.